Imagine looking up and seeing 64 enemy fighters diving straight at you, a black swarm of death blotting out the sun. One American pilot inside a single P-40 Warhawk completely alone. No wingman, no backup, no escape route, just him and the largest aerial attack he had ever seen. What happened next would become one of the most unbelievable moments in air combat history. A moment where one pilot used an impossible trick to flip the entire battle in seconds. His name was Lieutenant Carl Hunter Mason, a pilot known not for skill, but for stubbornness. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the deadliest, and he had only a handful of combat hours. But what he did have was nerve. The kind of nerve that makes a man look at impossible odds and decide, not today. The P-40 Warhawk was a tank in the sky, heavy, rugged, difficult to fly at high altitudes. Japanese Zeros outclimbed it, outturned it, and outmaneuvered it in every single way. Most pilots feared dogfighting Zeros. Mason? He feared nothing because he understood something others didn't. The P-40 couldn't turn, but it could dive like a falling meteor. And that one advantage was all he needed. Mason's mission was simple: patrol the Burma front and report enemy movement. He expected a quiet morning, but war never respects expectations. As Mason crossed the valley, his radio crackled, but only static answered. His squadron was far behind. He was alone, and then he saw them. Like a black storm brewing over the horizon. Zeros, dozens of them, moving in formation so perfect it looked unreal. 64 Japanese fighters, a full strike formation. No one, not even the best pilots, would willingly fly into that. Mason didn't have a choice. The swarm broke formation and began to descend. He was already locked in their sights. Running wasn't an option. Surviving wasn't either. Unless he did something drastic, something no sane pilot would even attempt. The first burst of machine gun fire ripped past Mason's canopy. He pushed the throttle forward, the P-40 vibrating violently as it strained for speed. Zeros swarmed behind him like hornets, fast, agile, and deadly. A single mistake meant instant death. But Mason wasn't thinking about dying. He was thinking about opportunities, and he saw one. Mason slammed the nose down, straight into a vertical dive. Most pilots avoided dives this steep. The wings could rip off. The controls could freeze. But Mason trusted the P-40's rugged frame. The Zeros followed, but something happened. They began struggling to keep equal speed. Their lightweight frames, perfect for maneuvering, were terrible in high-speed dives. Mason hit the P-40's red line. The Zeros began to scatter. But he wasn't done yet. At the bottom of the dive, Mason pulled something insane, a maneuver pilots called the cutthroat roll. It was simple in theory but nearly impossible at full speed. A sudden half-roll combined with a hard yaw kick. 99% of pilots attempting it at high speed either blacked out, stalled, or slammed into the jungle. Mason made it look effortless. In one split second, he rolled clear, and the entire front line of Zeros overshot him. Mason had turned the hunted into the hunter. The moment a Zero slid into his gun sight, Mason squeezed the trigger. The P-40's 6.50 caliber Brownings unleashed a storm of fire so violent it shook the whole aircraft. The Zero exploded into a cloud of smoke and metal. One down, 63 to go. He should have run. Any sane man would have. But Mason wasn't here to run. He was here to fight. The swarm regrouped. This time, they attacked from all directions. High, low, left, right, a perfect kill box. Mason pushed the P-40 past every limit the engineers imagined. The wings groaned under stress, bullets tore through the tail, but he kept fighting. He flew not like a man, but like a force of nature. And then came the moment that shocked even the Japanese pilots watching from above. 3 Zeros boxed him into a deadly triangle. Instead of escaping downward, Mason yanked the P-40 upward in a brutal climb, a move the P-40 wasn't built for. The Zeros followed, but too miscalculated. They collided mid-air in a fiery explosion. Mason didn't fire a single bullet. He let physics do the job. 3 Zeros neutralized. The remaining swarm grew nervous. But the battle was far from over. The second wave dropped from the sun, the oldest air combat trick in the book. Sunlight blinded Mason for a second, but he didn't need sight. He needed instinct. An instinct told him to dive again, but this time it wasn't to escape. It was to set a trap. Using the P-40's greatest strength, speed and a dive, Mason performed a textbook boom and zoom. He dove, gained speed, climbed, fired, and retreated before the Zeros could react. One Zero spiraled down in flames. Another lost a wing. Another stalled, trying to follow his climb. Mason wasn't just fighting, he was teaching the Zeros what the P-40 could do in the right hands. But there was a problem, a deadly one. Mason's ammo counters were dropping fast. He had fired nearly 1,200 rounds. Only a few bursts remained. 64 enemies. A single pilot low on ammo. This was no longer just combat. This was survival. And that's when Mason pulled the trick that truly no one expected. Mason closed in on a Zero without firing. Instead, he used his wing. The P-40's wings were thick and metal reinforced, far stronger than the Zero's lightweight frame. A slight tap at the right angle could send a Zero spinning. Mason executed a perfect wingclip maneuver, a calculated, razor-thin slice. The Zero spiraled into the jungle below. No bullets. Just skill, precision, and nerves of steel. The fight had dragged on for nearly 20 minutes. Mason's fuel gauge was sinking. His engine temperature was climbing. Every alarm that could blink was blinking. But the Zeros were losing momentum. Their formation broke. Their discipline cracked. They had expected an easy kill. Instead, they found a monster in the sky. Mason pulled the P-40 into the clouds, not to hide, but to confuse the remaining Zeros. Inside the cloud cover, visibility was zero. Mason reversed course in a tight turn, emerging behind the pursuing aircraft. Before they even knew what happened, he fired his last two bursts. Two more Zeros fell. Silence returned to the sky. The last remaining Zero circled once, then broke off and retreated. The Japanese pilots had seen enough. One P-40, 64 fighters, and a battle flipped upside down by a single man's courage and impossible aerial tricks. Mason's aircraft was riddled with bullet holes. The tail was shredded. The engine was coughing. But it was still flying because its pilot refused to die. Mason spotted a tiny makeshift strip along the jungle. With almost no fuel left, he lowered the landing gear and prayed. The P-40 slammed into the dirt, skidding violently before finally grinding to a stop. Smoke poured from the engine. Mason climbed out, stumbled to the ground, and finally allowed himself to breathe. When Mason's squadron found a bullet-riddled aircraft, they refused to believe one man had fought an entire formation. But the Japanese combat reports confirmed it. 64 fighters. Multiple losses. One P-40 that refused to fall. Mason never bragged about that day. He didn't have to. The legend of the lone Warhawk spread on its own, a story of courage, insanity, and an impossible trick that changed the fate of an entire battle. Some stories fade. Some survive. But the tale of the lone P-40 against 64 Japanese fighters remains one of the most extraordinary examples of what a single person can do when the world tells them they should lose. Mason proved one truth: a pilot's greatest weapon is not his aircraft. It is his will to fight.